The Parsi are one of the most successful communities in India and one of the most endangered. Mumbai, home to the largest Parsi population on earth, and that population is disappearing. Mumbai, India's financial capital, built in part by Parsi industrialists and philanthropists. They fled the Islamic conquest of Persia 1300 years ago, carried their Zoroastrian faith across the sea to India. The Tata family, the Godrej family, the Wadia family, Parsi dynasties that shaped modern India, and for 13 centuries, they kept their bloodline sealed, marrying only within the community. Researchers began collecting DNA samples from the community in the early 2000s, a community that gave India its first steel mill, its first airline, its nuclear program. DNA confirmed the seal held almost no outside genetic contribution for over 1,000 years. Their religion is among the world's oldest, Zoroastrianism, the worship of fire and truth. But that genetic purity came at a cost nobody expected, a cost written into their DNA, concentrated by 13 centuries of isolation. But modern genetics revealed something the community wasn't prepared for. Those who stayed behind faced centuries of gradual marginalization. The population shrank steadily. To understand the cost, you have to understand the escape. The Sassanid Empire, the last great Zoroastrian civilization, stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. In 651 CE, Arab armies conquered Persia. Islam replaced Zoroastrianism as the state religion. The Sassanid Empire lasted 4 centuries, Persia's golden age of Zoroastrian civilization. Conversion was not always voluntary. Zoroastrians faced increasing pressure over the following centuries. Zoroastrian fire temples burned across the empire. The religion shaped Persian identity for over 1,000 years. Sometime between the 8th and 10th centuries, a group of Zoroastrians fled by sea. The original Persian gene pool contained enormous diversity. The founders carried only a sample. The conquest was swift and devastating. Within decades, Zoroastrian temples were converted to mosques. Across the Arabian Sea to the Gujarat coast of India, the Qissa-i-Sanjan, their founding narrative, records the journey. Those who refused to convert faced increasing restrictions, higher taxes, social exclusion, loss of legal rights. The legend says they promised the local Hindu king they would blend in, but they never blended genetically. The decision to flee was not taken lightly. They left everything behind except their faith. The founding group was small, perhaps a few hundred families at most. Geneticists estimate the effective founding population at roughly 1,000 individuals. Every marriage within the community increased the chance of shared ancestry between partners. Sugar in milk, they would sweeten the community without changing its character. But genetically, they stayed the sugar. The king supposedly asked the refugees how they would fit in. They answered with a metaphor about sugar dissolving into milk. 1,000 people carrying only a fraction of the original Persian gene pool, and then sealing it shut. Multiple genetic studies have now mapped the consequences of that bottleneck. 1,000 founders, sampling from millions. Entire branches of genetic diversity left behind in Persia. The most immediate signature is homozygosity, long stretches of identical DNA on both chromosomes. The simulation was clear. At that population size, drift dominates within decades. When both parents share distant ancestors, their children inherit identical DNA segments from both sides. Indian by nationality, Iranian by genetics, Zoroastrian by faith. A triple identity held together for 13 centuries. In the Parsi, these runs are among the longest found in any non-Island population. Long stretches where both copies of the chromosome are essentially identical. That homozygosity is where the medical cost hides. Recessive disease variants that would normally stay silent. When both parents share a common ancestor, their child inherits the same DNA segment twice. In a large outbred population, a harmful recessive variant is rare. The chance of both parents carrying it is tiny, but in an endogamous community of 60,000 descended from 1,000 founders. Recessive means you need 2 copies. In a large population, that is extremely unlikely. The carrier frequency for specific variants is 3 to 5 times higher than in surrounding populations. The demographic crisis makes national news regularly. A community too prominent to ignore, but in a community where everyone shares distant ancestors, 2 carriers meeting is almost inevitable. The same variants that were harmless in ancient Persia became dangerous inside a sealed gene pool. Genetic counseling has become increasingly important within the community. Breast and ovarian cancer, Parkinson's disease-specific blood disorders, all elevated in the Parsi. Awareness campaigns now target the community specifically. Early detection saves lives. BRCA mutation frequencies in the Parsi are comparable to the Ashkenazi Jewish population, among the highest in the world. Screening rates in the Parsi community have increased significantly in the past decade. Both communities share the same genetic architecture, small founding populations, centuries of endogamy. The founder effect didn't just preserve their Persian ancestry, it concentrated their vulnerabilities. Traditional Parsi weddings are elaborate affairs, but fewer are celebrated each year. 2 communities on opposite sides of the world, same genetic architecture, same medical challenges. The admixture analysis confirmed what the community always claimed. They remained genetically Persian. On the genetic map, the Parsi sit closer to modern Iranians than to any Indian population. Less than 5% South Asian genetic contribution over 13 centuries living in India. 95% Iranian. After 13 centuries, surrounded by one of the world's most genetically diverse nations. The endogamy was almost absolute. Fewer than 1% of marriages involved non-Parsi partners historically. India has over 4,500 endogamous groups, but none maintained isolation as completely as the Parsi. Community-specific educational materials explain the science in accessible terms. 1,300 years in India. Genetically, they never left Persia. Near zero gene flow per generation for over 50 generations. The community enforced endogamy through religious law. Children of mixed marriages were excluded. Community registers tracked every family, every marriage, every birth. Marriages were arranged within a network of known Parsi families. Outsiders were excluded absolutely. But that sealed gene pool is now shrinking rapidly. From 114,000 in 1941 to roughly 57,000 today. The Parsi are not alone. Founder populations worldwide face the same genetic challenges. Some families kept genealogy records going back over 10 generations, ensuring no outside blood entered. Low birth rates, late marriages, and aging population. The community faces demographic collapse. More Parsi die each year than are born. The gap has widened every decade since the 1990s. Parsi, Ashkenazi, Finnish, Amish, Quebec, French, different histories, same genetic mathematics. The Parsi are dying out, not from disease or war, from genetics and demographics. Parsi housing colonies that once housed hundreds of families now have empty apartments. The fertility rate is roughly 0.8, well below the 2.1 needed for replacement. The average age of marriage has risen above 30. Many choose not to have children at all. The median Parsi age is over 50. India's median age is 28. The population pyramid is inverted. More deaths than births every year for the past 3 decades. The community center, where the old world and the new world negotiate the future every day. The Geo-Parsi program offers free IVF treatment, subsidized housing for young families, marriage counseling. The Indian government launched the Geo-Parsi program, subsidizing fertility treatments and housing for young Parsi families. A child lighting the same flame their ancestors lit in Persia 1,300 years ago. The results have been modest, roughly 200 births over 5 years. Not enough to reverse the decline. A government paying a community to reproduce. That's how dire the demographic crisis has become. Younger Parsi increasingly marry outside the community, breaking the 13th century seal. About 30% of recent Parsi marriages are now intermarriages. The rate is accelerating. The intermarriage debate divides generations. Elders defend tradition. Young people demand freedom. Genetically, outmarriage will increase heterozygosity and reduce recessive disease risk. Some argue that accepting intermarried children is the only path to survival. But it will also dissolve the Persian genetic signature that survived 13 centuries. The genetic simulation is stark. At 30% outmarriage, the Persian component halves within 3 generations. The community is divided. Preserve genetic identity and face extinction, or open up and survive. A 2017 whole genome study quantified the damage precisely. The temples still burn, the priests still tend the sacred fires, but the pews are emptier each year. They identified over 200 variants at elevated frequency in the Parsi relative to global populations. Over 200 variants, many linked to known disease pathways. Whole genome sequencing captured every variant, every mutation accumulated over 13 centuries. Parkinson's disease risk alleles were enriched, as were variants linked to specific blood disorders. The computational analysis compared each Parsi variant against global databases. The founder effect acted like a magnifying glass. Rare variants became common inside the sealed community. Some variants were entirely unique, found in no other population on Earth. Parsi-specific mutations. Understanding these concentrated variants allows targeted screening programs for the community. Community-specific screening panels now exist, testing for the variants most concentrated by the bottleneck. Drug metabolism variants at unusual frequencies. What works for most Indians may not work the same for the Parsi. The parallel with Ashkenazi Jewish genetics is striking. Similar bottleneck, similar endogamy, similar medical consequences. Personalized medicine requires knowing the patient's genetic background. For the Parsi, that background is unique. Lessons from Ashkenazi carrier screening programs are being adapted for the Parsi. The Ashkenazi program reduced Tay-Sachs by 90%. The Parsi could achieve the same for their concentrated variants. The Ashkenazi model took decades to implement. The Parsi program is building on that foundation. The genomic data is being archived, a genetic snapshot of a community that may not exist in its current form for much longer. Community engagement is critical. The screening must be voluntary, private, and culturally sensitive. The Parsi face a question no genetic test can answer. The samples are preserved at -80 degrees. A genetic time capsule of a vanishing community. Is genetic purity worth demographic extinction? Demographic models project the community could fall below 10,000 within 50 years under current trends. The cemeteries are full. The cradles are empty. The math is unforgiving. The bloodline that survived 13 centuries of isolation may not survive the 21st. Every projection model ends the same way. The current path leads to functional extinction within decades, but the DNA record is permanent. Even if the community changes, the genetic archive will preserve what they were. 3 generations. The grandparents who married within the community, the parents who debated it. She carries the same Persian DNA her ancestors brought across the Arabian Sea 13 centuries ago. The evidence converges from population genetics, medical genomics, and demographic modeling. Across that water, in Iran, a few thousand Zoroastrians remain, the other branch of the same ancient tree. 1,300 years of genetic purity, confirmed by DNA, and now, perhaps, coming to an end. Genetically, the two communities are still recognizable as the same people, separated by an ocean and 13 centuries. A community that fled an empire to preserve their faith, sealed their blood to preserve their identity, and now faces the cruelest irony. The purity that saved them may be what ends them. The sacred thread that binds the community woven for 13 centuries, now fraying at the edges. If you found this investigation valuable, subscribe. We trace the DNA evidence behind the stories history got wrong. Every week, a new case. The fires still burn, but the congregations that sustain them are smaller each year.